Liam held the invitation between his thumb and forefinger. It wasn't paper. It was a judgment, rendered in cream-colored cardstock, so thick it felt like a slab of marble. The calligraphy, a swirl of shimmering gold ink, was a testament to the obscene amount of money the Vance family could spend on something designed to be thrown away. It announced the union of Chloe Vance, his ex-girlfriend, and Julian Croft, a man whose primary personality trait was the balance of his trust fund. Liam's name was written with perfect, deliberate strokes. An afterthought, or perhaps the entire point. He could almost hear Chloe's voice, a melody of condescension and feigned sympathy, as she must have instructed the calligrapher. "Oh, and add Liam. Yes, Liam Sterling. It's the least we can do. He'll want to see me happy." He had been called many things in his life: ambitious, idealistic, a dreamer. But the label Chloe had affixed to him during their final, acrimonious breakup was the one that had been forged into a weapon against him: her broke ex. It was a title she had bestowed with the casual cruelty of the very rich, a simple, dismissive summary of a man she had decided was no longer a worthwhile investment. Now this invitation felt like a summons to court, where he was expected to stand as a witness to his own inadequacy, to applaud the verdict that her life had soared while his had stagnated. What Chloe and her family didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend from their gilded perch, was that while they were busy building a monument to their own status, Liam had been quietly building an empire. Within 1 month at that very wedding, their carefully constructed world of appearances would not just be challenged, it would be demolished, brick by gilded brick. We've all felt underestimated at some point, haven't we? Judged by a cover that doesn't tell the whole story. It's a universal feeling, that sting of being written off. I'd love to know where you're watching from today, what part of the world you're in. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy stories where dignity wins and arrogance is served its just desserts, you'll want to stick around. Be sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and satisfying vindication. Now let's get back to that invitation. Liam placed the card on the polished concrete countertop of his kitchen island. The space around him was a study in minimalist perfection. A vast, open-plan loft overlooking the city skyline through a wall of seamless glass. The morning light streamed in, catching the subtle grain of the dark walnut cabinetry and the clean lines of the furniture he had designed and built himself. This was his sanctuary, a space that was the physical manifestation of his design philosophy: strength in simplicity, beauty in structure, and an unwavering belief that what lies beneath the surface is what truly matters. His breakup with Chloe had been an exercise in that very philosophy. It happened not in a dramatic explosion, but in a slow, structural failure. Their relationship had been built on a faulty foundation. She had loved the idea of him, the handsome, brooding architect with grand visions. She was captivated by his passion when he spoke of reshaping skylines, of creating spaces that could influence human emotion. But she had no patience for the process. She saw his long hours in a small, shared studio, not as dedication, but as a lack of immediate results. She saw his refusal to take on soulless, high-paying corporate projects as a lack of ambition rather than an abundance of integrity. The final conversation had taken place in her father's mansion, a sprawling, neoclassical monstrosity that Liam privately thought was an architectural travesty. Alistair Vance, Chloe's father, had been there. He was a man who built his real estate empire on volume and flash, erecting garish condominiums that sacrificed soul for square footage. He sat in a wingback chair, nursing a brandy, a silent, smirking juror at Liam's trial. "I just don't see where this is going, Liam," Chloe had said, her voice strained with a practiced disappointment. "My friends' boyfriends, they're closing deals, they're making partner, you're still making models out of balsa wood." "It's called developing a portfolio, Chloe. It's about building a reputation based on quality, not just speed," Liam had responded, his voice dangerously calm. He refused to let them see his hurt. Alistair had snorted into his glass. Son, there's a world of blueprints, and there's the real world. In the real world, you either build empires or you stay in the sandbox. From where I'm sitting, you're still playing with toys. The final blow came from Chloe. Tears, which Liam knew were more for effect than genuine sorrow, welled in her eyes. I need a partner, not a project. I can't keep defending you to my family, to my friends. I can't be with someone who has so little to show for himself. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Later, he would hear through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances how she described him. Liam? Oh, he was sweet, but you know, he was my broke ex. Broke. The word was so simple, so absolute. It ignored the richness of his ideas, the wealth of his talent, the pricelessness of his integrity. It measured his entire existence by the number in his bank account at that specific moment, a number that was indeed modest as he poured every spare dollar into launching his own firm, Sterling Designs. They saw a man in a rented studio apartment in a 10-year-old car. They didn't see the late nights, the sacrifices, the two major anonymous design competition wins that were funding his vision. The quiet confidence of a man building a foundation of solid granite while they were constructing a facade of gold-painted plaster. He picked up the invitation again. The wedding was to be held at the Ethelgard estate, the most exclusive and ostentatiously expensive venue on the coast, a place known for its dramatic cliffs and its year-long waiting list. An invitation there was a power move. For him, it was a dare. His first instinct was to burn it, to throw it in the sleek, smokeless fireplace and watch the judgment turn to ash. But then a different thought began to form, a thought as quiet and solid as the steel beams hidden in the walls around him. Burning the invitation was a reaction. Attending was an action. They had written his story for him, casting him as the cautionary tale, the ghost of Chloe's humble past. Perhaps it was time he offered an epilogue. He wouldn't go for revenge. Revenge was beneath him. He would go for clarity. He would attend as a quiet, respectful guest, and he would let the truth speak for itself. In his pocket, his fingers brushed against a cool, heavy piece of metal. It was his business card, custom milled from a thin sheet of titanium. It held only his name, his firm, and a single elegant line representing a skyline. It was his symbolic object, a tangible reminder of the substance they refused to see. He slid it back into his pocket. Yes, he would go. The decision to attend the wedding settled in Liam's mind not with a surge of anger, but with a profound sense of calm. It was the same feeling he got when a complex design problem finally resolved itself into a simple, elegant solution. This was not about confronting Chloe or her family. It was about honoring the man he had become, a man they had never bothered to know. He owed it to himself not to hide. Hiding would be an admission of the shame they tried to heap upon him. His presence, quiet and dignified, would be the most powerful statement he could possibly make. A few days after the invitation arrived, his phone buzzed. Chloe's name flashed on the screen. He let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep breath and centering himself. He was in his office, a sprawling, light-filled space that occupied the top 2 floors of a building he now owned. Below him, 30 architects, drafters, and engineers worked on projects spanning from bespoke private residences to major urban renewal initiatives. Liam, you got my invitation, I hope. Her voice was bright, a little too bright, laced with the manufactured sweetness he knew so well. I did, Chloe. It's elaborate, he said, his tone neutral. He swiveled in his chair to look out at the panoramic view of the city. He could see 3 of his firm's completed projects from this vantage point, their clean lines and innovative use of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the clunky, beige towers that bore the Vance corporate logo. Daddy is insisting on the best of everything. You know how he is, she said with a little laugh. a sound designed to subtly remind him of a world he supposedly couldn't afford. "I really hope you can make it. It would mean a lot to me, to us." The "us" was a deliberate twist of the knife. "I'm sure it would," Liam replied, his voice even. He refused to take the bait, to ask why she would want her broke ex at the celebration of her new prosperous life. He already knew the answer. He was a prop. He was the before picture in her life's triumphant after. "I know it might be awkward," she continued, her voice dropping into a tone of faux concern. "But we're adults, right? And I want you to see how happy I am. I want you to know that I've moved on, and I want the same for you." This was the core of her condescension, the assumption that he was still pining, still stuck in the past she had so eagerly abandoned. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. She was lecturing him about moving on, while he was sitting in the command center of a life she couldn't even imagine. "I appreciate the thought, Chloe," he said. "I'll be there." "Oh, wonderful," she chirped, the relief in her voice palpable. The prop had agreed to take his place on stage. "Julian is so excited to finally meet you properly. He's heard so much about you." Liam doubted that. Julian had likely heard a caricature, a carefully edited story where Liam played the part of the unambitious artist from whom Chloe had wisely escaped. "I look forward to it," he said, the words tasting like ash. After the call, he leaned back, his fingers finding the cool, reassuring weight of the titanium card in his pocket. He slid it out and placed it on his desk. Sterling Designs. It had taken him 5 years since the breakup, 5 years of relentless work, of sleeping in the studio, of reinvesting every penny. He had started with a single commission, a small but challenging modernist home for a tech entrepreneur who valued vision over a flashy portfolio. Liam had poured his soul into it. The design won a prestigious international award, and the client, thrilled, had introduced him to 2 more. His breakthrough came when he anonymously entered a competition to design the new headquarters for a global finance firm. His design, a daring, eco-conscious tower that was both a work of art and a marvel of engineering, won against proposals from a dozen of the world's most famous architectural firms. When his identity was revealed, the industry was stunned. Who was Sterling Designs? This quiet, boutique firm that had just outmaneuvered giants? The victory brought not just a massive contract, but something far more valuable: a reputation for genius. From there, the ascent had been meteoric. He had been strategic, choosing projects that challenged him, that built upon his firm's brand of quiet brilliance. He avoided press, letting the work speak for itself. To the public world of glossy magazines and society pages, where the Vances lived, he was still a nobody. In the world of high-stakes architecture and development, the world of people who actually built things that mattered, he was becoming a legend. He thought of Alistair's words: "You either build empires or you stay in the sandbox." Liam looked out his window at the city. He wasn't just building buildings, he was building a legacy. Alistair built commodities, Liam built landmarks. And Alistair, for all his bluster, had no idea. He was a dinosaur, oblivious to the coming meteor. Liam's decision was solid. He would attend the wedding not as the man they thought he was, but as the man he was. He wouldn't arrive in a flashy car or wearing a designer suit dripping with logos. That was their language, their validation. He would wear a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit. He would be polite. He would be gracious. He would be himself. And he would let them fill in the blanks, to project their own narratives onto his quiet presence. The power, he knew, was not in the reveal, but in the contrast. The truth didn't need to shout, it simply needed to be present. The more they mocked the man they thought he was, the more foolish they would look when the reality of the man he had become was laid bare. He picked up the titanium card and slid it back into his pocket. It felt like a key, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that it would unlock a door they never even knew was there. The week before the wedding, Chloe's mother, Eleanor Vance, hosted a pre-wedding cocktail party at the family mansion. Liam knew his attendance was not optional. It was part of the performance. To decline would be seen as bitter or petty, feeding the very narrative he sought to dismantle. So he drove his same 10-year-old car, a car he kept not out of necessity, but because it was perfectly functional and he felt no need to replace it, up the long, winding driveway to the Vance estate. He handed the keys to a valet who gave him a look of faint, pitying surprise, a silent judgment that set the tone for the evening. The house was exactly as he remembered, an opulent cavern of marble floors, gilded furniture, and oversized portraits of Vance's ancestors trying to look important. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulatory chatter. He spotted Chloe immediately. She was wearing a dress the color of champagne, holding court in the center of the grand ballroom, Julian at her side. Julian was handsome in a bland, predictable way, with the easy, unearned confidence of a man who has never been told no. As Liam entered, a ripple of awareness seemed to follow him. Heads turned. Whispers like the rustling of dry leaves began to circulate. He was the ghost at the feast, the living embodiment of Chloe's starter boyfriend. He ignored them, heading straight for the bar to get a glass of sparkling water. He needed to keep a clear head. Before he could take a sip, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. It was Alistair Vance. "Sterling, didn't think you'd have the guts to show," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble. He held a glass of dark liquor, the ice clinking like coins. "Good to see you. Chloe was worried you'd be, well, you know." "I wouldn't miss it," Liam replied smoothly, turning to face him. He met the older man's gaze without flinching. Alistair's eyes, small and shrewd, scanned Liam's simple suit, his lack of a flashy watch, and a small, satisfied smirk played on his lips. Liam was performing exactly as expected. "Still in that little studio of yours, drawing your pictures?" Alistair asked, taking a large swallow of his drink. It wasn't a question, it was a declaration of Liam's perceived status. "My firm is doing well, thank you," Liam said, the words precise and measured. Alistair laughed, a short, barking sound. "Your firm, right. Listen, son, I know about firms. I deal with real architects, the big boys. Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, Foster and Partners. They build skyscrapers that touch the clouds. They understand scale. They understand power." He leaned in, his voice dropping conspiratorially, the smell of expensive scotch on his breath. "You build little models. I build empires. There's a difference. No hard feelings, it's just the way of the world. Some men are built for the big leagues. Others, well, others are good for practice." He clapped Liam on the shoulder again, a gesture of dismissive benediction, before turning to greet a more important guest. The insult was so perfectly crafted, so layered with condescension, that Liam almost had to admire its efficiency. Good for practice. He was the training wheels Chloe had used before riding off on her expensive new bicycle. Liam stood there for a moment, the force of the insult washing over him. He felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the old anger, the familiar sting of being so profoundly misjudged. But he pushed it down. Anger was their fuel. His calm was his shield. His fingers instinctively went to the titanium card in his pocket. He traced its sharp, clean edges. It was a physical anchor in a sea of empty words. A moment later, Julian approached him, Chloe a step behind, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "So, you're Liam," Julian said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, aggressive, a petty display of dominance. "Chloe's told me a lot about you." His eyes flicked over Liam, a quick, dismissive appraisal. "She said you were an architect?" "That's right," Liam said. "Interesting. I dabble in real estate myself," Julian said, puffing out his chest slightly. "My family's portfolio, mostly commercial properties. It's a tough game, high stakes. You've got to be aggressive." "I'm sure," Liam replied, his face a mask of polite neutrality. Chloe jumped in, her voice a little too loud. Liam is more of an artist, darling. He designs beautiful things. Smaller scale, of course, very niche. She framed it as a compliment, but it was a clear demarcation. Julian was in the world of high stakes. Liam was in the world of niche. One was important, the other was a quaint hobby. Right, art, Julian said, nodding as if he understood a complex foreign concept. Well, good for you. Sticking with your passion takes a certain kind of person. The unspoken words hung in the air. A person who isn't concerned with real success. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. He was introduced to Chloe's friends with phrases like, "This is Liam, we go way back." His professional life completely erased. He was seated at a table near the kitchens with distant cousins and disgruntled former employees of Vance Corp. Throughout the night, he caught Chloe and her parents glancing over at him, their expressions a mixture of pity and self-satisfaction. They were checking on their pet project, making sure he was witnessing their triumph from the cheap seats they had assigned him. Liam endured it all with a quiet, unassailable grace. He engaged in polite conversation. He listened more than he spoke. He observed. He saw the cracks in the facade, the way Julian's eyes would dart around the room when Chloe wasn't looking, the way Alistair's laughter was always a little too loud, a little too desperate. They were all performing, just as he was. The difference was he knew his role was temporary. They believed theirs was real. As he was leaving, he passed Alistair again, who was holding court with a group of investors. Alistair saw him and, for the benefit of his audience, called out, "Leaving so soon, Sterling? Don't worry, you'll get used to how the other half lives." The investors chuckled politely. Liam just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good night, Alistair," he said, his voice even. "Enjoy the evening." Driving away from the mansion, the quiet hum of his old car was a comfort. He wasn't angry. The evening had been clarifying. They weren't just underestimating him. They were fundamentally incapable of seeing him. Their vision was obscured by the glare of their own gold-plated world. They could only measure a man by the labels they understood: wealth, status, connections. They had no metric for integrity, for patience, for quiet, unyielding competence. And that, he realized, was not his weakness. It was their fatal flaw. The wedding was in 3 days. The stage was set. The audience was confident. And the curtain was about to rise on a play they had no idea they were in. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of painfully perfect day that feels like a cinematic invention. Liam stood before the floor-to-ceiling window in his bedroom, a cup of black coffee in his hand. The city was waking up below him, a sprawling network of concrete and steel, ambition and dreams. From this height, the world seemed orderly, a system of interconnected parts. It was how he saw everything, a structure, a design. And today, he was a willing participant in a poorly designed social structure, one built on the shaky foundations of ego and illusion. He felt a profound sense of calm, the quiet before the storm. There was no anxiety, no lingering anger from the cocktail party. That event had been a necessary stress test, confirming the arrogance and blindness of his antagonists. Their condescension was a constant, a known variable in the equation. Now, all that was left was the execution of the day. His suit was laid out on the bed. It was not a brand they would recognize. It was a bespoke creation from a reclusive tailor in Milan, a man who only worked with a handful of clients. The fabric was a deep charcoal gray, so dark it was almost black, with a subtle texture that absorbed the light. It was a suit designed to be appreciated by those who understood quality and to be invisible to those who only looked for labels. It was, in essence, Liam in sartorial form. As he dressed, his mind drifted not to Chloe, but to his work. On the large drafting table in his home office, blueprints for his most ambitious project yet were laid out: the Helios Tower. It was a commission from the enigmatic and legendary developer Marcus Harrison, a man who was more of a myth than a figure in the real estate world. Harrison had built his reputation on creating architectural landmarks that defined city skylines. He was a purist, a visionary who had been semi-retired for years, waiting for a project and an architect that could reignite his passion. He had contacted Liam 6 months ago after seeing the award-winning design for the finance headquarters. There was no formal interview. Harrison had simply shown up at Liam's office, unannounced, and they had talked for 4 hours. Not about budgets or timelines, but about philosophy, about light and shadow, about the responsibility of building things that would outlive them. At the end of the conversation, Harrison had stood up, shaken Liam's hand and said, "You're the one. Let's build something the world will remember." The Helios Tower was that something, a marvel of sustainable technology and breathtaking aesthetics. It was set to become the new benchmark for urban architecture. The partnership with Harrison was a closely guarded secret, to be announced at a press conference in a month's time. Harrison was a fiercely private man, and the project was still in its delicate, formative stages. This secret knowledge was Liam's true armor. While the Vances and Julian Croft played their status games, competing in a sandbox of local real estate and society gossip, Liam was in a different league entirely, playing a game they didn't even know existed. His phone chimed. It was a text from Marcus Harrison himself. "Flight plan filed. Wheels up at 1 p.m. See you at the airstrip. Don't let these peacocks get to you." Liam smiled. Harrison knew about the wedding. Liam had mentioned he had a personal obligation he had to attend on the coast. And when Harrison had learned the venue was the Ethelgard estate, a place he found laughably pretentious, he had insisted on flying them both there in Liam's jet. Harrison had business with another guest at the wedding, a detail he had mentioned offhandedly, but Liam hadn't paid it much mind. Liam finished dressing. He checked his reflection in the mirror. The suit fit perfectly. He looked like himself, only sharper, more defined. He slid the titanium business card into the inner pocket of his jacket. He wouldn't need it, but it was part of his ritual, a reminder of substance. He walked out of his minimalist home, the door clicking shut behind him with a satisfying, solid sound. Down in the private garage beneath his building, he walked past the old car he'd driven to the Vance mansion. A few spaces down sat a sleek, black Aston Martin DB11, a car he had purchased not as a symbol, but as an appreciation for perfect design and engineering. He rarely drove it. Today was not the day for it. Theatrics were for the insecure. He took a cab to the private airfield on the outskirts of the city. As the taxi pulled up, the driver's eyes widened at the sight of the jets lined up on the tarmac. Liam paid the fare, adding a generous tip, and walked towards a gleaming Gulfstream G650, its engines quietly humming. The pilot, a man named Captain Evans, greeted him with a respectful nod. "Mr. Sterling, good morning. Mr. Harrison is already aboard." "Thank you, David," Liam said, climbing the steps and entering the cabin. The interior was as minimalist and elegant as his own home: cream leather, dark wood, and brushed steel. Marcus Harrison sat in one of the large swivel chairs, reading a biography. He was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Liam," he said, looking up with a warm smile, "ready for the circus?" "As I'll ever be," Liam replied, taking the seat opposite him. "I've never understood the appeal of the Ethelgard," Harrison mused, looking out the window as the jet began to taxi. "It's a beautiful location ruined by ostentation. People pay a fortune to be told how exclusive they are. It's a monument to insecurity." Liam just nodded. Harrison understood. "The funny thing is," Harrison continued, "I actually have to be there today. I need to have a word with Alistair Vance. He's been hounding me for months about a joint venture. Wants my name attached to one of his ghastly resort projects. I've been putting him off, but my assistant said he'll be there. I figure I'll give him his answer and be done with it." Liam froze. Alistair Vance. Of all the people, the universe, it seemed, had a flair for dramatic irony. "You know him, then?" Liam asked carefully. "I know of him," Harrison corrected. "He represents everything I dislike about this industry. All flash, no substance. His buildings have the shelf life of milk. But business is business. Sometimes you have to deal with the peacocks." The jet accelerated down the runway, a surge of incredible power, and then lifted gracefully into the air. Below them, the city shrank away. Liam looked at the powerful, principled man sitting across from him, the man who was his partner, his mentor. He thought of Alistair Vance, strutting and preening at the cocktail party, lecturing him about the big leagues. He thought of Chloe and Julian, so confident in their small, shiny world. They were all about to collide. And Liam was at the very center of the collision, flying thousands of feet above it all, in the quiet, calm eye of the storm. The Ethelgard estate was perched on a dramatic peninsula, accessible only by a private ferry or the estate's own helipad and airstrip, the latter reserved for a select few. As the majority of the wedding guests boarded the opulent, champagne-serving ferry for the 30-minute ride, the mood was one of giddy self-importance. They were the chosen few, granted access to a fairy tale wedding in a fairy tale location. The Vance family crest was emblazoned on everything from the cocktail napkins to the ferry's flag. On the island, Alistair Vance was in his element, greeting his guests as they disembarked like a king welcoming subjects to his court. He was beaming, his chest puffed out. This day was the culmination of his life's work, not his business, but the careful curation of his family's social standing. His daughter was marrying into new money, solidifying the Vance dynasty. The venue, the guest list, the sheer, unapologetic expense of it all. It was a declaration of victory. "Welcome, welcome," he boomed, shaking hands and slapping backs. "Glad you could make it. Find the bar. The ceremony starts in an hour." Chloe was a vision in white, a radiant, smiling bride. But beneath the smile, a small, nagging thought persisted. Liam. She scanned the faces coming off the ferry. He wasn't there. A part of her was relieved. His quiet, judging presence might have cast a shadow. But another, more perverse part of her was disappointed. The full effect of her triumph required his viewership. She had even planned the moment, a brief, pitying conversation where she would wish him well. The benevolent queen speaking to a former courtier. Julian, standing beside her, noticed her distraction. "Looking for someone?" he asked, a slight edge to his voice. "Of course not, darling," she said, squeezing his arm. "I just want everything to be perfect." Liam, meanwhile, had arrived as a ghost. He had chosen to take the ferry with the catering staff and musicians an hour earlier, wanting to slip in unnoticed. He found a quiet corner on a stone terrace overlooking the sea, a place far from the main reception area. He watched the guests arrive, a parade of pastel dresses and expensive suits. He saw the Vances in their glory, soaking in the admiration of their peers. He felt strangely detached, an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. As the hour of the ceremony approached, a subtle tension began to permeate the festive atmosphere. The officiant, a prominent judge and old family friend of the Vances, had been delayed. His assistant had called, flustered, explaining that a sudden traffic jam on the coastal highway meant he had missed the final guest ferry. Alistair's smile tightened. "Get him a helicopter," he barked into his phone at his assistant back on the mainland. "I don't care what it costs." A few minutes later, the assistant called back, his voice trembling. "Sir, the coastal fog is rolling in. The choppers are grounded." Panic began to set in. The guests were seated. The string quartet was running out of music to play. Chloe was pacing in her bridal suite, her perfect smile melting into a mask of anxiety. This was not part of the plan. Her perfect day was being threatened by something as mundane as traffic. Then another call came, this one for Alistair. It was from Marcus Harrison's secretary. "Mr. Harrison's arrival has been slightly delayed, Mr. Vance. He will be there shortly." Alistair's panic sharpened. Harrison. He had almost forgotten. The legendary developer's attendance was a major coup, something Alistair had been boasting about for weeks. Harrison's potential partnership was the cornerstone of his next big project. His presence at the wedding was meant to be a public endorsement, a signal to the other investors present. "What do you mean, delayed? How is he getting here? Did he miss the ferry too?" Alistair demanded. "Mr. Harrison has his own travel arrangements, sir," the secretary replied coolly. "He asks that you keep the airstrip clear." The airstrip? Alistair's mind raced. Only a handful of people had clearance to use the Ethelgard's private runway. Harrison was one of them. A wave of relief washed over him, quickly followed by a surge of pride. Of course, Marcus Harrison wouldn't deign to take a ferry. He would arrive by private jet. This was even better. It was a grander entrance, a more potent display of power. "Keep that strip clear," he yelled to the estate manager, "and get someone to meet him. A golf cart with champagne." The whispers started to ripple through the guests. The officiant was missing, but Marcus Harrison was flying in. The drama of the delay was momentarily forgotten, replaced by the anticipation of a celebrity arrival. From his secluded terrace, Liam heard the distant but distinct sound of jet engines. He checked his watch. It was time. He walked calmly from his hiding place, rejoining the periphery of the crowd, just another anonymous man in a dark suit. All eyes turned towards the sky, searching for the source of the sound. A moment later it appeared, a sleek, white Gulf Stream descending gracefully from the clouds. It was a beautiful machine, a symbol of a level of wealth and freedom that made even the Vance's extravagance seem provincial. It banked smoothly, lined up with the private runway carved into the cliffside, and touched down with barely a whisper. The jet taxied towards a small, designated terminal, a good distance from the ceremony area, but visible to all. The engine spooled down. A reverent hush fell over the guests. Alistair, Chloe, and Julian stood at the front, their faces a mixture of awe and anticipation. Alistair was practically vibrating with excitement. The door of the jet opened, the staircase lowered. A figure appeared at the top. It was Marcus Harrison, his iconic white hair catching the afternoon light. He stood for a moment, surveying the scene with an unreadable expression, then began to descend. Alistair started forward, ready to greet his prize guest, his savior. But then, a second figure appeared in the doorway of the jet. This figure was younger, dressed in a simple, dark charcoal suit. He moved with a quiet, unassuming confidence. He paused at the top of the stairs, his eyes scanning the crowd, his gaze calm and steady. It was Liam. He walked down the steps, not behind Harrison, but beside him. They exchanged a few quiet words, then started walking together towards the assembled wedding party. The silence that fell over the crowd was no longer reverent. It was absolute, profound, and utterly devastating. It was the sound of 1,000 assumptions shattering at once. Chloe froze, her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent "oh." Julian's smug expression dissolved into slack-jawed disbelief. Alistair Vance stopped dead in his tracks, his face a comical mask of confusion, his mind struggling to process an image that simply did not compute. The prop, the broke X, the ghost from the cheap seats, had just arrived on a private jet with the most powerful man in the room. The play had just been rewritten, live on stage, and the Vances had just been demoted to stunned members of the audience. The walk from the airstrip to the ceremony lawn felt like an eternity. For the wedding guests, it was a slow-motion tableau of confusion. For Liam and Marcus Harrison, it was just a walk. They were two colleagues arriving to an event. The seismic shockwaves their arrival had created were not their concern. As they drew closer, the stunned silence of the crowd began to fracture into frantic, hushed whispers. Who was he? How did he know Marcus Harrison? Was that his jet? Every question was a chisel, chipping away at the carefully constructed reality of the Vance family. Alistair Vance was the first to recover, his brain rebooting from the shock. His instinct for opportunism overrode his confusion. He saw Marcus Harrison, and his mind saw his resort deal. The young man with him, Liam, was an anomaly, a puzzle piece that didn't fit, but he could be dealt with later. The priority was Harrison. "Marcus! My God, what an entrance!" Alistair boomed, striding forward with his hand outstretched, his voice a little too loud, a little too shaky. "We are so honored, absolutely honored." Harrison took Alistair's hand, his grip firm and his expression unreadable. "Alistair, I apologize for the delay. We ran into some headwinds." He then gestured towards Liam. "I believe you know my lead architect and partner on the Helios project, Liam Sterling." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Partner, lead architect, not artisan, not niche, not the boy who played with balsa wood. Alistair's eyes darted from Harrison's impassive face to Liam's calm one. The smirk that was his default expression had vanished, replaced by a pale, gaping confusion. "Sterling," he stammered, the name tasting foreign in his mouth. "Your partner?" "Indeed," Harrison said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Liam's firm is the visionary force behind the tower, one of the most brilliant architectural minds I've encountered in 50 years. I wouldn't have come out of retirement for anyone else." Chloe had drifted forward, a phantom in her white dress. Her face was ashen. The blood had drained from it, leaving her makeup standing out in stark, clownish relief. She stared at Liam, but it was as if she were seeing him for the first time. The simple suit she would have pitied an hour ago now looked like a statement of quiet power. The calm she had mistaken for weakness now seemed like unshakable confidence. "Liam?" she whispered, the name a fragile question. Liam met her gaze. There was no triumph in his eyes, no "I told you so." There was just a quiet, profound sadness. "Hello, Chloe," he said, his voice soft. Julie and the groom stood frozen a few feet away, looking back and forth between his fiancée and the man who had just stolen the entire show. His entire posture had deflated. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen, impotent anger. He had been rendered irrelevant at his own wedding. Harrison, either oblivious to the personal drama or masterfully ignoring it, continued. "We had a slight issue. The judge who was meant to officiate, Judge Albright, a dear old friend of mine, he called me from the traffic jam on the highway, knowing I was flying in. He's on board the jet. We brought him with us." He turned and gestured back towards the Gulf Stream. Judge Albright, a distinguished man in his 70s, was just now descending the stairs, carrying his robes. The problem of the missing officiant was solved, but it was solved by Liam. Liam's jet. Liam's intervention. He hadn't just upstaged them, he had inadvertently saved the very ceremony that was meant to be his humiliation. The irony was so potent, it was almost poetic. Alistair's mind was spinning, trying to reconcile two completely different realities. The broke, unambitious boy he had dismissed, and the man Marcus Harrison, the Marcus Harrison, was calling his partner. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. His resort deal, he needed Harrison. And Harrison was inexplicably linked to this young man he had so thoroughly insulted. "Well," Alistair managed, forcing a laugh that sounded like a cough. What a wonderful surprise, Sterling. Keeping your success under wraps, eh? Smart man, smart man." He clapped Liam on the shoulder, the same gesture he had used at the party. But this time it wasn't a gesture of dominance. It was a desperate, fawning plea. Liam didn't flinch. He simply looked at Alistair's hand on his shoulder, then back up at his face. He said nothing. The silence was more damning than any accusation. Chloe finally found her voice, a high, thin sound. "Your jet? That's your jet?" "It's a company asset, Chloe," Liam said calmly, as if explaining a simple, boring fact. The casualness of the statement was more stunning than any boast would have been. He owned a company that had a Gulfstream G650 as an asset. The string quartet had long since fallen silent. The guests were motionless, watching the drama unfold on the lawn. This was far more interesting than any wedding ceremony. This was a public execution of status. The Vances, who had built their entire identity on the flimsy scaffolding of public perception, were being dismantled in front of their entire social circle. The foundation of their world had been revealed to be sand, and the tide was coming in with a vengeance. And the man controlling the tide was the one they had written off as a harmless piece of driftwood. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was a study in social paralysis. The wedding, which was supposed to be the main event, now felt like an awkward, obligatory epilogue to the real drama. Judge Albright, ever the professional, was escorted to the front, and the ceremony began. But the magic was gone. Chloe stood at the altar, her eyes repeatedly straying from her groom to the spot where Liam now sat. He had taken a seat in the back row, next to Marcus Harrison, as if to deliberately minimize his presence. But his presence was all anyone could feel. He was a black hole of attention, his quiet dignity pulling all the energy in the room towards him. When Chloe said, "I do," her voice was a thin, reedy whisper, devoid of the joyous conviction she had practiced. Julian's response was clipped, almost sullen. They exchanged rings, but their eyes were haunted. They were pronounced husband and wife, but they looked like two strangers who had just been given a life sentence. The reception was even worse. It was a ghost of the celebration it was meant to be. The laughter was forced, the chatter was muted, and every conversation eventually circled back to the same topic: Liam Sterling. The Vances' attempt to create a monument to their own success had backfired spectacularly. They had inadvertently built a stage for the triumph of the very man they sought to diminish. Alistair Vance, a man accustomed to being the center of gravity in any room, was now a satellite, desperately trying to get into the orbit of Harrison and Liam. He approached their table, a glass of champagne in each hand, his face stretched into a painful-looking grin. "Marcus, Liam," he said, setting the glasses down. "A toast to new partnerships." Harrison looked at him with cold amusement. "We don't have a partnership, Alistair." Alistair's smile faltered. "Well, not yet, but I'm sure we can. I mean, with Liam here, a man of his talent, we should talk. My resort project, it's a legacy project. It needs a visionary architect." Liam looked up from his plate. He hadn't touched his food. He looked directly into Alistair's desperate eyes. This was the moment for the list of grievances. But he wouldn't deliver it with anger. He would deliver it with the cold, hard precision of a surgeon. "Let me see if I understand, Alistair," Liam began, his voice quiet but carrying across the table. "A few nights ago at your home, you told me I built little models while you built empires. You said I was good for practice. You advised me that I would get used to how the other half lives. Was that before or after you decided my talent was visionary?" Alistair paled. He had been so confident, so dismissive, that he had never imagined his own words would be read back to him like a court transcript. I was joking," he stammered. "A little friendly ribbing, that's all, between men." "Was it?" Liam asked, his gaze unwavering. "Because it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a judgment. A judgment you made based on the car I drove and the fact that I wasn't wearing a watch that cost more than it." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You measure a man's worth by his visible assets. That's your metric, that's fine. But my firm, Sterling Designs, we have a different metric. We value integrity. We value vision. We value substance over flash." He picked up his water glass. "And by our metric, Alistair, your values and ours do not align. We would not be a good fit. Thank you for the offer." He took a sip of water, a gesture of finality. It was a complete, calm, and utter demolition. Alistair stood there speechless, his face a mottled red and white. He had been dismissed. Not argued with, not fought with, but dismissed, as one would dismiss a pestering fly. He turned and stumbled away from the table, defeated. A few minutes later, Chloe appeared. She had shed Julian somewhere along the way. She stood before Liam, her hands clasped in front of her bridal gown now looking like a costume. "Liam, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. Harrison, with impeccable tact, stood up. "I believe I'll go and congratulate the judge on a fine ceremony," he said, leaving them alone. Liam gestured to the empty chair. Chloe sat. "I don't know what to say," she began. I'm in shock." "There's nothing you need to say, Chloe," Liam said gently. "No, I have to." Tears, real this time, welled in her eyes. "I was a fool. I was a child. I was so caught up in all of this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent ballroom. "In what my father wanted, in what everyone expected. I didn't see you. I didn't see what you were building." This was his moment for the moral mirror. "You saw what you wanted to see, Chloe," he said, his voice without malice. "You saw a man who didn't fit into your world, so you assumed he was failing in his own. You didn't just break up with me. You created a narrative about me to justify your decision. The broke ex. It made the story cleaner, didn't it? It made you the one who escaped, the one who chose wisely." She flinched as if he had struck her. I'm so sorry, Liam." "I know you are," he said. "You're sorry now that you have new information. But the character of a person isn't measured by how they treat a CEO. It's measured by how they treat the person they believe has nothing. By that measure, you and your family were found lacking." Her tears flowed freely now. "Is it too late? For us?" The question was audacious, breathtaking in its arrogance. Even now, after everything, she thought this was something she could fix, something she could have back. Liam gave a sad, small smile. "Chloe, you just got married. Your husband is over there, watching us, looking like his world has ended. Your relationship with him started with you using my memory as a stepping stone, and now it will continue with you looking at him and comparing him to the man you now think I am. That's not a foundation, it's a fault line." He stood up. "I wish you the best, Chloe. I truly do. I hope you find what you're looking for. But it isn't me. It never was." He walked away, leaving her sitting alone at the table, a bride in a ruined dress, at the center of a ruined party, at the start of a ruined marriage. The vindication Liam felt was not hot and triumphant. It was cold, clean, and utterly absolute. The rest of the wedding reception dissolved into a social train wreck. Julian, fueled by champagne and humiliation, got into a loud argument with one of his own groomsmen. Eleanor Vance, the silent enabler, was seen weeping in a corner, her social triumph turned to ash. The guests, sensing the disaster, began to make their excuses and slip away, boarding the ferry back to the mainland with the juiciest gossip of the year. The Vances' reputation, so carefully polished, was now irrevocably tarnished. They hadn't just been upstaged, they had been exposed as shallow, cruel, and, worst of all in their world, poor judges of character. Liam and Marcus Harrison left quietly before the cake was even cut. As they walked back towards the jet, Alistair made one last desperate attempt. He jogged to catch up with them, his face slick with sweat. "Marcus, please," he panted, ignoring Liam completely. "Don't let a little personal history get in the way of a monumental business opportunity. The Sandpiper Resort, it's a billion-dollar project. We need a signature architect. We need Sterling." Harrison stopped and turned, his expression one of utter disdain. "Alistair, let me be perfectly clear. I was never going to partner with you. Your proposal was uninspired, your financial projections were fanciful, and your design ethos is an affront to the very concept of architecture. I came here today as a courtesy to give you that answer in person. The fact that you so grotesquely insulted my lead architect only solidifies my decision. You are a man who cannot recognize value when it is standing right in front of you. You look for logos, not talent. You see price tags, not worth. I build legacies. You build disposable boxes. There is no partnership to be had. He paused, letting the brutal assessment hang in the air. And Liam Sterling is not for sale, especially not to you. Alistair looked as if he had been physically struck. He staggered back a step, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Harrison and Liam turned and continued their walk, leaving him standing alone on the manicured lawn, a king deposed in his own crumbling kingdom. On the flight back, the mood was quiet and reflective. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. "Well," Harrison said, breaking the silence, "that was more eventful than I anticipated." "I'm sorry you were dragged into my personal drama," Liam said. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. It was clarifying, and it confirmed everything I already believed about you. The way you handled yourself back there, the dignity, the restraint, that's character. That's more important than any building you could ever design. They didn't just underestimate your success, Liam. They underestimated your soul." The words resonated with Liam more than any of the day's dramatic events. He hadn't sought to destroy them. He had only sought to be seen for who he was. Their destruction was a self-inflicted wound, a consequence of their own blindness. His victory wasn't in their downfall, but in his own quiet refusal to sink to their level. He hadn't become cruel or vindictive. He had simply held up a mirror, and they had shattered at the sight of their own reflection. The foundation of Chloe and Julian's marriage, as Liam had predicted, was a fault line that cracked almost immediately. The humiliation of their wedding day became the defining story of their union. Julian could never look at Chloe without remembering her desperate, tearful conversation with Liam. He felt like a consolation prize, a man chosen for his wallet, who was then revealed to have a smaller wallet than the man he replaced. Their arguments were frequent and bitter, always circling back to that one fateful day. Chloe, in turn, was haunted by the ghost of the man Liam had become. She was trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, married to a man she didn't respect, forever ruining the day she had traded a diamond in the rough for a piece of polished glass. The consequences for Alistair Vance were more tangible. Marcus Harrison's public rejection at the wedding sent shockwaves through the investment community. If Harrison, the gold standard of development, believed Vance was all flash and no substance, then others started to look more closely. The billion-dollar Sandpiper Resort project, which was built on a mountain of debt and optimistic projections, began to unravel. Investors pulled out. Banks called in their loans. Within 6 months, Vance Corp was forced to declare bankruptcy, selling off its portfolio of disposable boxes for pennies on the dollar. Alistair, the man who built empires, was left with nothing but the crumbling ruins of his own arrogance. Liam watched it all from a distance, reading the business headlines with a sense of detached closure. There was no joy in their downfall, no triumphant pleasure. There was only a quiet affirmation that foundations matter. His was built on integrity, patience, and hard work. Theirs was built on ego, appearances, and scorn. The collapse was inevitable. A few months after the wedding, Liam stood on the observation deck of a newly completed skyscraper. It wasn't one of his, but he admired its design. He was waiting for Marcus Harrison. They were meeting to finalize the public announcement of the Helios Tower. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. "I heard about your father's company. I'm sorry. I hope you're okay." It was Chloe. He didn't know how she got his new number. He hesitated for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. He thought about all the things he could say. He thought about the anger, the hurt, the eventual, satisfying vindication. And then he let it all go. Their story was over. He had already written his epilogue. He deleted the message without replying. Harrison arrived a moment later, clapping him on the back. Ready to show the world what we've been building, son? Liam looked out at the sprawling city, a tapestry of light and shadow, of concrete and dreams. He could see the site for the Helios Tower far below, a patch of earth waiting for its future. He felt a sense of peace, a feeling of rightness that went deeper than revenge or satisfaction. It was the feeling of a master builder who knows his foundation is strong, his design is true, and his work will endure. "I'm ready," Liam said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Let's build something that will touch the sky." True worth is not measured in gold, but in character. It's not about the noise you make, but the foundations you lay. The world is full of people who will try to label you, to put you in a box that makes them feel bigger. But your value isn't determined by their opinion. It's determined by your integrity, your patience, and your unwavering belief in the person you are building yourself to be. In the end, facades crumble, but a strong character, like a well-built structure, will stand the test of time. What did you think of Liam's response? Was it the perfect revenge, or would you have been more confrontational? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for this story. If you found it satisfying, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and vindication. Until next time, remember to build your own life on a foundation of solid rock.